Welcome, Gunrunner.
Hello everybody, Kieran aka the Laird here, and I've got a new episode of Laird's Lowdown for you. And today I'm not going to be speaking to the camera like this for the whole episode, because what we're going to be talking about today and looking at is something that requires me to put it on full screen in a bit more detail. So this is going to be a quick intro, but basically yesterday Atari released a new, I say yesterday when I'm recording this video, not yesterday when this video goes out. So it'll actually be last week, shall I say, Atari released an updated list of all the IP they own. And they've done this from time to time over the years. It just gives you an awareness of, the games they own and what copyrights and trademarks and stuff they have. And not usually that exciting, but it is this time round. Because as we all know, Atari have acquired quite a bit of IP recently again. And I've covered this already in one of these Laird's Lowdown videos. I talked about when they acquired the Intellivision IP, and I talked about them bringing back Infogrames and what that meant as well. So I have covered this subject a fair bit, and I speculated on what IP they might buy next and stuff like that. But what's interesting about this in particular is that a lot of this IP that they acquired recently, which they had announced in the press, was that we didn't actually know what the titles were that were included. Because when Atari announced their most recent IP acquisitions, they never actually listed what was included in them. They announced that they'd bought a stack of IP which included Accolade, which they used to own, because Infogrames bought out Accolade. It was one of the first companies they purchased, actually, when they started madly purchasing loads and loads of companies, which I discussed in the Infogrames video. They mentioned that they bought Accolade IP, and they mentioned that they bought Stern IP. So these have been mentioned already in the press, but they never listed the titles that were included in those deals. And one of the reasons why this is important, actually, on a wider scale across this Atari IP catalogue, is that if you remember years back, when Atari got in financial trouble, and actually the American company, holding company, I believe it was, did declare bankruptcy and went into administration, and then they were pulled out of it because they managed to get further investment to pull the company out of it. They sold off lots of their IP, which is how they helped actually raise a lot of the money to bring the company out of bankruptcy. So we were never really sure what IP they still owned and didn't own, because some of it was sold. Some was sold in chunks. So, for example, when they sold Accolade, they sold that all to one studio, and now they've bought that back. So it looks like they own nearly all of that Accolade IP, original IP, as we'll see in a moment. Nearly all of it, at least. And then there was other stuff there was MicroProse. They sold the MicroProse name and IP as well, and to somebody. There was a few others that they sold off as well. Like they sold, I think I mentioned, all the Philips Studio IP. They sold to Pixel Games UK, Paul Andrews' company, and there was some other bits and pieces as well that they split off in bits. Like they sold the Ocean software IP. They sold some of that to Pixel Games. They sold some of that to Pico Interactive. The same with some of the other stuff they own, like Beam Software. I think some of that was bought by Paul Andrews, some of it was bought by Pico Interactive. So there was some that was split off in different parts. There was odd things that were bought by like one company, like for example, Rebellion bought Battlezone, but nothing else. So there was odd little bits and pieces that were sold off, and it's interesting now to see what they actually do own, and we will go through this in a minute, because there was actually quite a few surprises actually on it of stuff that I think either people didn't realise they owned, or stuff that we didn't think they still owned. They may have bought it back. And there's also some titles that I was surprised to see they owned. Actually, I mentioned in a recent video that I did. Actually, it was a 7800 plus video when I did that. Was it that one? I think it was that one, or was it the Atari handheld one? It was one of them anyway, but I mentioned some of the... Oh, no, it was the Atari 700 Plus one, because it was the bit where I was talking about the games that they were releasing. Yeah, so I've done so many videos on Atari recently, it's hard to remember which ones I talked about what. But yeah, there was some IP that was shown in that video that I didn't know they owned. And I did wonder how they'd come to acquire it, and that is mentioned on these documents. So they do actually definitely own it. It's not them licensing it through somebody else, which I did wonder if that was the case or what. So yeah, it's all very, very interesting indeed. So what I'll do now is I will flip to actually that IP list, and I'll put it across the screen so we can go through it and have a look at it in a bit more detail and pick out some interesting points for it, because I think it's something that's really cool to have a look at, especially for Atari fans like me. Okay, so here we are. This is the IP list, which, as you can see, says it was updated on the 31st of August 2024, but it wasn't released for people to see until roughly a week ago, from what I understand. So we will go through it page by page, and unsurprisingly, it starts off with Atari IP. So there's not going to be anything particularly surprising in here really, because this is just obviously all the mostly Atari 2600 games, 7800 games, and early arcade games. So all this stuff you'd expect to see. Obviously lots of the stuff that appears on every retro compilation, like Asteroids and Missile Command and Breakout, Centipede and etc. Combat, blah blah blah, all these things. Also there's also a few Lynx games on there, like you see Checkered Flag there. Dracula the Undead. There's some Atari 8-bit stuff like Eastern Front is there. I was interested to see though Frisky Tom, because that's a 5200 game, but that was a Nichi Butsu coin-op from what I understand. So I find it strange that they own the rights to that one. That's all. The only thing there that particularly stood out to me as surprising though was that one. So we'll go to the next page, which is just more Atari IP. So lots more of that stuff we know about. There's Ninja Golf in there, Outlaw, Mr. Run and Jump, a recent game, so that's interesting to see. Zulu, I'm not sure what Zulu is. Yard's Revenge is in there. So lots of the usual stuff in there. Video Pinball, Star Raiders. So let's go. And then we've got Atari IP various publishers. So recent stuff by Digital Eclipse. Because obviously Atari took them over fairly recently. Interesting to see there that some of these Cloudy Mountain, Dark Haven, Night Stalker are actually the Intellivision games that they remade for the Amico console, which of course was never released. So interesting to see them there. Night Dive, so that obviously another studio that Atari took over fairly recently, so their games. Then Atari IP various publishers. This is where it actually starts to get interesting, and this is what I was talking about in the intro. So very little there for GT Interactive, which surprised me because I was expecting to see more. And actually one of the games I was expecting to see there, and I'm not sure why it's listed, is Blood. And I don't know why Blood is missing, because that was a GT Interactive game, number one. But number two, Atari re-released it on Steam just recently, as you can see. So they published it on Steam, and it was done by Night Dive Studios, their own studio. So why is it not listed on the IP list? Blood Fresh Supply, which is the remake of the original Blood, really did really well from what I understand. Got amazing reviews right across the board, as the original did, but everyone seems to really like the remastered version. So it says there overwhelmingly positive. So yeah, very strange to see it not listed there in the IP. I'm not sure why that is. Then Infogrames, and what's interesting about Infogrames is that a lot of the Infogrames IP was sold off, as I've talked about before. A lot of it to Pico Interactive. They bought a lot of Infogrames IP. I've got a feeling that there might be a few that went to Pixel Games as well, but Pico Interactive bought tons. But even though they sold off loads of the Infogrames IP, some of their most famous games, I was pleased to see that they still own Draken, which is a bit of a cult classic. They still own Hostages, which is possibly Infogrames' best game from those computer years when they were making games for home computers. Hostages appeared on a lot of different systems, and it's a really good game, and it would suit itself really well to being remade as well. So it's interesting to see that there on there as well. That'd be really good. I mean, in terms of obviously if Evercade wanted to get in on some more of this stuff, there's some good ones. Hostages would be a great one to have, for example. And then MicroProse, again, they sold off lots of the MicroProse IP, so I did wonder what they would have left in that regard. But there are, again, some quite surprising big name titles here. Airborne Ranger, that was a huge hit for MicroProse, that appeared on lots of different home formats, and that's in here. So Airborne Ranger, very cool to see. F117, a Nighthawk stealth fighter, that was another quite big name flight sim that appears on here. And on this second part here, I noticed Knights of the Sky, another one that was very successful, reviewed well back in the day. So that's cool to see there as well. And then Stern Electronics, obviously they picked up all of Stern's. Stern is still going, but primarily a pinball company. They'd stopped making video games a long time ago. After, video game crash really put a stop to that. Atari have bought all their video games, but Berserk, Frenzy, obviously Lost Tomb, three of their most famous ones that are there. But where is Bagman? I did wonder what that was. Another one of Stern's sort of probably most popular games. That's not there, Bagman. And I thought The End was by Stern as well, although they may be licensed out from a Japanese manufacturer. But certainly, I was sure Bagman was Stern IP, but that doesn't seem to be on that list. So I'm a bit mystified by that. But yeah, there. Atari IP, various publishers. So there's Accolade. So this has got some of those Accolade games that they bought up. It seems that they didn't buy up all the Accolade IP, just some of it, because there's obviously Test Drive is missing, for example, which is a big Accolade IP. They sold that off separately, and there's someone coming out with a new Test Drive game soon, isn't there? I've seen it previewed. So yeah, but they do own Bubsy, which I think is very cool. So obviously they released that Bubsy collection just recently. I'm not sure if it's out yet actually, but I think it is, for modern formats. Combat Cars is there, which I loved on the Mega Drive, so that was cool to see Combat Cars on that list. Hardball is there, which is one of Accolade's most famous games. Redline is there, and I tell you, you might not have heard of Redline, but it is a sequel to Battle Wheels from the Lynx. So that is really cool to see Redline on that list, being that it's connected to Battle Wheels from the Lynx, which of course Battle Wheels was a third-party game, not Atari. It was done by Beyond Games. Beyond Games that actually still exist. They're called what are they called now? I'm trying to think. They do like kids games now. They became Smart Bombing Interactive, and Wildworks. That's what they're called now. They're now called Wildworks, but they still exist. Beyond Games are still going. Who do it? Redline, Wildworks. Barclay Shut Up and Jam is on there. Obviously just removed Barclay's name, so just called it Shut Up and Jam. Mean 18, which is an interesting one because obviously Mean 18 was on this 7800. So that means that Atari can release the Atari 7800 version of Mean 18 on anything they like now as well, because they have the ownership for that. And likewise it's Hardball in a way, because you've got the Atari 8-bit version which they could release if they wished. Bubsy, obviously you've got the Jaguar version which they can now re-release if they wish. In fact, Shut Up and Jam, there's a Jaguar version of that, isn't there? Although it was a prototype, it means that Atari now effectively own that. The prototype was sold by My Atari, I believe it's My Atari, but yeah, they own Shut Up and Jam. And I was interested to see Summer Challenge and Winter Challenge there, because I thought they were now owned by Pico Interactive, but because they appeared on Evercade, one of the Evercade compilations. But no, here they are, listed as being Atari owned. So then the M Network IP, so all the games that the M Network did for the 2600. And what's interesting in this is that it's got some stuff that never came out. In Search of the Golden Skull, for example, Locomotion, which is actually strange to see, because I'm sure Locomotion is a conversion of a Konami arcade game, so I'm not sure if that's there in error, but yeah, they've got some prototypes there, so I do wonder if they get hold of them and get some of those prototypes released. But yeah, all these end lot here basically all seem to be games that are prototypes that were never released. Then other, so there's got some books and some weird other stuff like Awesome Golf. I'm not sure why that's in other. I mean, that was a Lynx game. handmade software. I actually thought that Songbird had taken over all the handmade IP, but apparently not, 'cause Awesome Golf's there. But weirdly, Malibu Bikini Beach Volleyball isn't listed there anywhere, which they have already re-released. It was on Atari 50. So it's strange that they put Awesome Golf there, but not Malibu Bikini Volleyball. The other sports game, of course, that Handmade did was Jimmy Connor's Tennis, which might be harder to rework to take the license out. And there was Power Factor, which I think Handmade did as well. And that's not on this list. So I'm a bit confused about the Handmade IP situation, because they do list Awesome Golf but don't list any of the other stuff. Interesting things to pick out on here as well is Bounty Bob Strikes Back. I speculated, because there's a 7800 version of that coming out, whether Atari had bought Miner 2049er, which is here, and Bounty Bob Strikes Back, and it seems that they have, so they obviously bought them off Big 5 software. Braindead 13 was one I was interested to see, because that's Ready Soft, but it was released for the Jaguar CD, of course, so that's a nice throwback to one of their consoles there. So very interested to see Braindead 13 there, obviously along the same lines of stuff like Dragon's Lair. And Head Over Heels, which was Ocean IP, which I actually thought that Head Over Heels they'd sold to Pico Interactive, because Pico Interactive released a Jaguar version of it. So strange to see that there, unless Pico sold some of the IP back to Atari. I'm not sure, perhaps that's the case. Iron Soldier, which I didn't realise they owned now, but apparently they do, so it's really cool to see Iron Soldier, because it's the two Jaguar games and the later Nuon game and PlayStation 1. Jerry the Germ Goes Body Popping is an interesting one to see, because that was Firebird who did that. And I know they sold off the Firebird IP, but for some reason it seems that they still own Jerry the Germ, which is strange to see. Mr. Nuts, another Ocean game, which it seems that I thought they'd sold, but apparently they haven't. And it says they're Tank, and it says in brackets Ocean to differentiate it from Atari's own Tank, I guess. But the strange thing about seeing Tank there is that Tank was an arcade license. Ocean licensed that from SNK. So I don't think Atari do own Tank at all. So I think they've made a mistake there as well. The art studio as well, I think it was Melbourne House. So that's interesting to see that there, because I thought they'd sold all the Melbourne House. I thought all the Melbourne House stuff actually went to Paul Andrews. And now I've got ahead of myself now, and there we go, I'm back to where I was. So yeah, some interesting stuff there though to pick up on. I think there might be some mistakes in there. Actually, I just noticed there Crazy Bricks as well, which is a homebrew game for the Atari 7800, but it was released for Atari Age, so I'm guessing that's why they own that now. Tubes, I wonder if that's the homebrew game for the 7800 as well. And what's Warp Speed, an Accolade game? I thought it was, so surely that should be over there, but so I do think there's still a little bit of confusion on here. I know Atari have had really issues trying to sort out what IP they own and what IP they don't own, but there we go. So Atari IP Intellivision, so this is basically, they bought Intellivision, didn't they? So this is all the IP they inherited by buying Intellivision, so all the Intellivision games, nothing obviously surprising there, lots of stuff, and the Aquarius, a few Aquarius games as well. So obviously the failed computer that Mattel released back in the day, that comes obviously with the Intellivision IP, so that's interesting to see there as well. Surprised it's only a few titles. I would have thought it'd be a lot more than that, but apparently not. And I think there's one more page. Atari Hardware. So now this you think, oh, it's just hardware, but this is really interesting, because if you look what they've got on here, which means that this is stuff that they've gone and made an effort to actively trademark again, stuff where the trademarks would have long expired, and they've gone and renewed the trademarks for stuff like the Atari Portfolio, the Transputer Workstation, which is obviously a really obscure computer. I guess it's just to stop other people profiting off it. We've got Mega STE on there, Atari Cosmos, which of course never released, Game Brain that was never released, Atari Panther, which was never released. So very strange to see, and all the controllers, the disk drives, stuff like that on there as well. So that's interesting to see. They've renewed all these copyrights for different things there. The ST's in there, and I have heard whisperings that Retro Games Limited are doing an ST Mini after they've done this Spectrum one that they're just about to release now. I've heard that the ST is going to be their next one, that they've already secured the license from Atari, because they've started suing people for various things. I've noticed Retro Games Limited, they're suing someone who was doing an Atari 800 XL kind of reproduction. I saw this in a Spectrum group the other day. Actually, someone posted it in a Spectrum group, and I didn't know about it until literally the other day, which is why I've never mentioned it in any of the previous videos that I've done talking about the IP. But it seems that Atari has sub-licensed some of that IP to Retro Games Limited, like for the Atari 400. And on the letters that some people have received threatening them with lawsuits, there is mentions of the ST and Retro Games Limited owning the rights to reproduce the ST. So that suggests that there is an ST console going to come next, probably after the ZX Spectrum one, which kind of makes sense. We've had Amiga, so why not ST? We've had Atari 8-bit, so there we go. But that's the IP list from Atari. Lots of interesting stuff on there, I'm sure you'll agree. I'd love to know what you think of all this, and if there's anything that you picked out from it that I haven't that's particularly interesting to you. But as always, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon. Bye bye.